Hello students, welcome. If you're preparing for your Class 10 economics exam, then let's get you ready. In this quick revision session, we are going to go through the entire chapter on globalization and the Indian economy, making sure all the important concepts are absolutely clear in your mind. We'll break this down into 5 simple parts. First, we'll ask, what is globalization really? Then we'll look at the factors that made it all happen. After that, and this is very important, we'll see how it has impacted India. Then we will talk about the struggle for a fair globalization. And finally, we will end with a checklist that you can use for your last-minute revision. All right, let's start with the very basics. To understand this whole chapter, you need to be very clear about a few key definitions. So let's begin right there. So, at the very center of globalization, we have these things called multinational corporations, or MNCs. Now, as the name suggests, these are basically just big companies that operate in more than one country. They set up their factories and offices in places where they can find cheap labor and resources. And why do they do this? Well, it's for one simple reason: to keep their costs down and make as much profit as possible. This picture here is a perfect real-world example. A large American or European company might design its products in its home country, get the parts made in China, assemble them in, say, Mexico, and then handle its customer service from a call center right here in India, just like the one you see. MNCs do this because India has a huge number of skilled, English-speaking youth who can provide these services at a much lower cost. This is how production gets spread across the globe. So all the money that an MNC spends to set up its operations in another country, to buy land, build a factory, or purchase machines, is called foreign investment. Now, please remember this term, students. It's very important for your exams. This is the main way that money and new technology flow from one country to another. So how exactly do these MNCs connect with a country's economy? Well, they have a few common ways. Sometimes they'll partner with a local company, bringing in their money and the latest technology. Other times, they might just buy a local company completely and expand its production. And a very, very common method, especially in industries like garments or footwear, is to place large orders with small local producers. All these actions pull local economies into a giant global network. And all of these things we just talked about, the foreign investment, the way MNC has spread production, they all lead us to the main definition of this chapter: globalization. It is simply this process of rapid integration or interconnection between countries. You can just think of it as the world becoming more and more connected, all driven by the flow of goods, money, and technology across borders. So now we know what globalization is. But the next big question is, how did it happen so fast? Let's now look at the 2 main engines that have been driving this whole process. There are 2 major reasons why globalization has happened so quickly. The first is huge improvements in technology, and the second is a big change in government policies, a process we call liberalization. Let's examine each one. First up, technology. Just think about transportation. We now have huge container ships and cargo planes that can move goods across the world much faster and at a much lower cost than before. And at the same time, we've had the revolution in information technology. The internet, computers, and mobile phones. This has made communication instant. Information can travel across the world in seconds for almost no cost. So technology has really made the world a smaller place. Now, before we get to the second factor, we need to understand a simple term: a trade barrier. A common example is a tax on imports. A government puts this tax on foreign goods to make them more expensive. This is done to protect its own local industries from competition. So you can think of a trade barrier like a gate that a government can control. Okay, so what then is liberalization? Well, it's simply the process of removing those barriers. It's the government deciding to open the gates to foreign trade and investment. When a government liberalizes its policies, it makes it easier for goods to be imported and exported. In India, this big policy change happened around the year 1991. And now we come to what is probably the most important part of this chapter for your exams: the impact of globalization on India. It's very important to remember that this impact has not been the same for everyone. It is a story of both winners and losers. This slide really shows us the 2 sides of the coin. On the left, we see who has benefited. Consumers in cities have more choice and cheaper products. Some large Indian companies have become multinational themselves, and our IT sector has grown tremendously. But look at the right side. Small producers, for example, our local toy makers, found it very difficult to compete with cheap imported toys. And for many workers, jobs became much less secure. To understand this impact on workers, just think of Sushila's story from your textbook. She had a permanent job in a garment factory with benefits. But because of intense competition from global brands, companies started demanding flexibility. This meant workers like Sushila lost their permanent jobs and were hired only when there was a lot of work, often with lower wages and no benefits. This pressure to cut costs often hurts the workers the most. So, because the impact has been so uneven, it raises a very important question. How can we make globalization fair for everybody? This brings us to the idea of fair globalization. Let's see what that really means. Now, fair globalization does not mean we should stop globalization. Not at all. It means we need to create rules to ensure that the benefits of globalization are shared more equally. The goal is to create opportunities for everyone, not just the rich and powerful, so that everyone gets a fair share of the benefits. And here, the government's role is absolutely crucial. It can protect workers by making sure labor laws are followed properly. It can support small producers with technology and money to help them compete. If an industry is really struggling, it can even use trade barriers for some time. And very importantly, it has to negotiate hard at organizations like the WTO for rules that are fair for all countries. Okay, we've covered all the main ideas of the chapter. To finish, let's just go through a quick mental checklist. You can use this exact structure to frame your answers in the exam. So let's go through this slowly. Before your exam, just ask yourself these questions. 1. Can I define an MNC and globalization clearly? 2. Can I explain the two main factors that made it possible, technology and liberalization? 3. Can I describe the impact on India, remembering both the positive side for consumers and the negative side for small producers and workers? And finally, 4. Can I explain what fair globalization is and what the government can do to achieve it? And that brings us to the end of our revision. Please go over these points one more time. I really hope this session was helpful for you. All the very best for your exams!